The dusty beam of afternoon sunlight cut through the attic window as 16-year-old Emma Rodriguez climbed the creaking wooden steps, hunting for old Christmas decorations her mother had requested. What she found instead, wedged behind a box of forgotten photo albums, would shatter everything she thought she knew about her father. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The leather wallet fell open as she pulled it free from its hiding place, revealing a gleaming gold badge that read Federal Bureau of Investigation, and beneath it, a laminated ID card bearing her father's photograph alongside a name that wasn't his. Special Agent Marcus Thompson, the card declared, not David Rodriguez, the quiet insurance adjuster who helped her with algebra homework and coached Little League on weekends. Emma's hands trembled as she stared at the badge, its weight somehow heavier than physics would allow. The man who had raised her, who made pancakes every Saturday morning and never missed a single school play, had been living a complete fabrication. Her father, David Rodriguez, didn't exist. He was Marcus Thompson, and he was FBI. David had spent the last 10 years perfecting the art of being ordinary. After a decade undercover infiltrating organized crime networks across 3 states, he had earned his exit from active duty through a combination of burnout, a close call that left him hospitalized for 3 weeks, and the birth of his daughter. The Bureau had offered him a desk job, but David chose something different. He chose to disappear entirely from that world, creating David Rodriguez, insurance adjuster, devoted father, and weekend warrior who fixed leaky faucets and grilled burgers with methodical precision. His wife Sarah knew fragments of the truth. She understood that his past was complicated, that certain topics made him change the subject, that he sometimes woke up in cold sweats from dreams he refused to discuss. But she had accepted his explanation that his previous work in law enforcement had ended badly, that he needed a fresh start, and that David Rodriguez was who he wanted to be now. She never pushed for details, perhaps sensing that some doors were better left closed. The transformation from Marcus Thompson to David Rodriguez had been meticulous. New social security number, new credit history, new everything, all arranged through bureau channels for agents transitioning out of deep cover operations. He had studied insurance regulations with the same intensity he once applied to criminal behavior patterns. He memorized actuarial tables like they were surveillance reports. He became David Rodriguez so completely that sometimes he almost forgot Marcus Thompson had ever existed. Emma had grown up in the suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona, in a ranch-style house with a well-maintained lawn and a 2-car garage. Her father worked for Southwestern Insurance Group, handling commercial property claims with a dedication that seemed almost excessive for such mundane work. He left for the office every morning at 7:45 sharp, returned by 6:30 for dinner, and spent evenings helping with homework or working on household projects. He was reliable, predictable, and utterly unremarkable in the way that only deeply remarkable people can manage to be. The family had routines that bordered on ritual. Saturday morning pancakes with fresh blueberries, Sunday afternoon drives through the desert to look at rock formations. Tuesday night was always pizza night, and David would let Emma choose the toppings while he told stories about difficult insurance customers and their creative explanations for property damage. These stories were always funny, always harmless, and always completely fabricated. What Emma didn't know was that every mundane detail of their life had been carefully constructed.
Chosen for its location in a safe, middle-class neighborhood with good schools and minimal crime. Even their choice of friends had been influenced by David's training, gravitating toward people who were stable, trustworthy, and unlikely to ask probing questions about his background. David had become a master of selective memory. When Emma asked about his childhood, he would share carefully constructed stories based on a real person's life, a cover identity the Bureau had developed years earlier. When she wanted to know about grandparents she had never met, he explained that his parents had died when he was young, which was actually true, though he omitted that their deaths had occurred during his second year undercover when he couldn't attend their funerals without compromising an 18-month operation. The closest calls had come during Emma's early years, when her natural curiosity about family history was strongest. She had wanted to do a genealogy project for school, and David had spent sleepless nights crafting a family tree that was detailed enough to satisfy a 7th grader, but contained no information that could lead back to his real identity. He had even gone so far as to create fake family photographs using image editing software he had learned during his undercover work. Sarah had noticed inconsistencies over the years. David's reflexes were too sharp for an insurance adjuster. He could assess threats and exits in any room within seconds of entering. He knew too much about criminal behavior, spoke Spanish with an accent that didn't match his claimed background, and had scars he explained away with increasingly creative stories. But she loved the man he was now, and she had made peace with not knowing the man he had been. The FBI badge Emma held in her trembling hands represented more than just a career change. It represented years of infiltrating drug cartels, weapons traffickers, and money laundering operations. Marcus Thompson had been deep undercover for so long that maintaining false identities had become second nature. He had been Miguel Santos, a mid-level drug distributor in Los Angeles. He had been Robert Chen, a money launderer working with Chinese organized crime syndicates. He had been Antonio Vasquez, a weapons dealer operating along the Mexican border. Each identity had required months of preparation, learning backgrounds, developing relationships, and slowly gaining the trust of people who killed for much smaller betrayals than the one he represented. Marcus Thompson had been shot twice, stabbed once, and beaten unconscious on 3 separate occasions. He had watched people die, had been forced to participate in activities that violated every principle he held, all in service of building cases that would eventually bring down entire criminal organizations. The psychological toll had been immense. After 7 years undercover, Marcus had begun losing track of who he really was. The lines between his false identities and his true self had blurred until he sometimes forgot which accent he was supposed to use in which situation. He had developed what the bureau psychologists called identity fragmentation, a condition common among long-term undercover agents, where the constant deception creates multiple, sometimes conflicting personality constructs. The final case had nearly killed him, literally and figuratively. He had been Miguel Santos for 2 years, working his way up through a drug trafficking organization based in El Paso when the operation went sideways. Someone had suspected him, though they never figured out exactly who. A routine meeting became an ambush, and Marcus found himself tied to a chair in a warehouse while cartel enforcers discussed the most creative ways to extract information from a suspected federal agent. He had maintained his cover even under torture, sticking to Miguel Santos' story with the conviction that probably saved his life. When backup finally arrived, based on a missed check-in protocol, they found him unconscious and bleeding, his cover blown, but his identity secure.
Identity still intact. The operation resulted in 47 arrests and the seizure of over $12 million in assets. But Marcus Thompson was done. The Bureau had offered him commendations, promotions, and high-profile assignments. Instead, he had requested the most complete extraction possible. He wanted out not just from undercover work, but from federal law enforcement entirely. The psychological evaluation that followed painted a picture of an agent who had given everything to the job and needed to find something left of himself to save. Creating David Rodriguez had been therapeutic as much as practical. Every mundane detail of his new life was a deliberate rejection of the chaos and violence he had lived with for a decade. The suburban house was the opposite of the rundown apartments and safe houses he has called home. The regular schedule was a luxury after years of unpredictable operations. The honest work, even if it was sometimes boring, was a relief after years of maintaining elaborate lies. When Emma was born, David had felt something shift inside him that he hadn't expected. The fierce protectiveness was familiar, but the simple joy was new. He had protected witnesses and informants before, but he had never experienced the pure, uncomplicated love he felt for his daughter. She became his anchor to his new identity,
proof that David Rodriguez was real and worth protecting. Sarah had been understanding about his need for privacy, but she wasn't naive. She noticed how he never spoke about old friends, how he deflected questions about his past with practiced ease, how he seemed to have no sentimental attachment to anything from before they met. She observed his hypervigilance, his ability to remember details that most people would miss, his uncomfortable familiarity with violence, even though he claimed to avoid it. There had been moments when the truth had almost surfaced. When Emma was 8, she had been approached by a stranger at a shopping mall who seemed to recognize David, calling him by a name that wasn't his. David had smoothly handled the situation, explaining to the confused man that he must have mistaken him for someone else. But Sarah had seen the flash of something dangerous in her husband's eyes, a calculation of threats and responses that belonged to someone with training in handling dangerous situations. Another time, a news report about a major drug bust had shown footage of an arrest David had been instrumental in setting up during his undercover years. He had left the room abruptly, claiming he needed to check on dinner, but Sarah had noticed his hands shaking slightly when he returned. She had begun to suspect that his past wasn't just complicated, it was classified. The insurance job had provided perfect cover for David's analytical skills and attention to detail. He excelled at investigating claims, interviewing witnesses, and detecting fraud. Abilities that seemed natural, but were actually highly specialized skills developed during years of federal training. His colleagues appreciated his thoroughness and his ability to spot inconsistencies that others missed, never suspecting that these talents had been honed while investigating criminal organizations. David had been careful to build friendships and relationships that supported his cover identity. He coached Emma's softball team, not just because he enjoyed it, but because it established him as a dedicated father in the community. He volunteered for neighborhood watch programs, using his law enforcement knowledge to make genuine contributions while reinforcing his image as a concerned citizen rather than a trained federal agent. The hardest part hadn't been maintaining the deception, but genuinely becoming the person he was pretending to be. David Rodriguez couldn't just be a mask that Marcus Thompson wore. He had to be a complete transformation. This meant letting go of habits, reflexes, and ways of thinking that had kept him alive during his undercover years. It meant learning to relax his constant state of alertness, to trust that his suburban...
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Neighborhood was actually safe. To believe that the threats he had spent years preparing for were no longer relevant to his life. But some things never changed. David still checked locks twice before bed, still positioned himself where he could see all exits in any room, still maintained a heightened awareness of his surroundings that went far beyond normal caution. These habits had become so ingrained that he couldn't abandon them entirely, though he had learned to disguise them as the quirks of a security-conscious homeowner rather than the reflexes of a trained federal agent. The financial aspects of his transition had been carefully managed by the Bureau's support network. David Rodriguez had a complete credit history, employment records, and financial background that would satisfy any investigation. The house had been purchased through legitimate channels, with a down payment that appeared to come from savings and a previous home sale, though the actual funding had been arranged through classified Bureau resources designed to support agents transitioning out of undercover work. Emma's discovery of the badge represented the collapse of everything David had built over the past decade. The carefully constructed life, the painstakingly developed relationships, the sense of safety and normalcy he had created for his family, all of it was now at risk. Because Emma wasn't just any teenager who had stumbled across a secret, she was his daughter, the person he loved most in the world, and the one person whose trust and respect he couldn't bear to lose. As Emma sat in the dusty attic, holding the badge that proved her father was someone else entirely, she felt her understanding of reality shifting beneath her feet like sand.
Every memory she had of him was now suspect. Every story he had told her, every explanation he had given for his sometimes odd behavior, every detail of their family history, all of it was potentially false. The man who had taught her to ride a bike, who had stayed up all night when she had pneumonia, who had cried at her 8th grade graduation, was living a lie so complete that she didn't know what was real anymore. The weight of the discovery was overwhelming. Emma realized that she was now carrying a secret that could potentially destroy her family, her parents' marriage, and everything she had believed about her life. She understood instinctively that this wasn't the kind of secret that could be casually revealed over dinner conversation. This was the kind of secret that changed everything, forever, and there was no going back once it was exposed. But Emma also felt a strange sense of relief, as if puzzle pieces that had never quite fit were finally falling into place. Her father's sometimes unusual reactions, his knowledge about things that seemed outside his experience, his protective instincts that seemed more intense than those of other parents, all of it suddenly made sense if he had been a federal agent. The inconsistencies she had noticed but never questioned now had an explanation that was both terrifying and oddly comforting. As she held the badge, Emma began to understand that her father's love for her had been real, even if his identity had been false. The man who had raised her might not be David Rodriguez, insurance adjuster, but he was still the same person who had protected her, encouraged her dreams, and made her feel safe in the world. The deception was about his past and his professional life, not about his feelings for his family. But understanding didn't make the betrayal less painful. Emma realized that her father had made a deliberate choice every day for 10 years to maintain this deception. He had looked her in the eye and told her stories about grandparents who might not exist, about a childhood that might not be his, about a career that was completely fabricated. The depth of the lies was staggering, and the implications were terrifying. What else didn't she know? Was David Rodriguez even his real name? Were there people from his past who might still pose a threat to their family? Had they ever been in danger because of his previous work?
Questions multiplied in her mind faster than she could process them, each one leading to more uncertainty about everything she had taken for granted about her life. Emma carefully placed the badge back in the wallet, her hands still shaking. She understood that she was now faced with an impossible choice. She could confront her father directly, demanding the truth about his real identity and his past, but that conversation would fundamentally change their relationship forever. Once she acknowledged that she knew about his deception, there would be no pretending that everything was normal. Alternatively, she could keep the secret, carrying the weight of this knowledge while continuing to pretend that she still believed in the fiction of David Rodriguez. But Emma wasn't sure she was capable of maintaining that level of deception, and she wasn't sure it would be fair to her father, who deserved to know that his carefully constructed cover had been compromised. As she climbed down from the attic, Christmas decorations forgotten, Emma realized that her discovery had not only revealed her father's secret, but had also forced her to confront questions about truth, deception, and love that were far more complex than anything she had expected to face at 16. The FBI badge had opened a door to a world she didn't understand, and she wasn't sure she was ready for what she might find on the other side. The house felt different as she walked through it, as if the familiar spaces had been transformed by her new knowledge. The family photos on the walls now seemed like elaborate props. The comfortable furniture and carefully chosen decorations felt like set pieces in an elaborate performance. Even her own bedroom, which had always been her sanctuary, now felt like part of a carefully constructed illusion designed to maintain her father's cover identity. Emma found herself studying every detail of their home with new eyes, looking for clues she had missed, signs of the truth that had been hidden in plain sight. She noticed things that had never seemed significant before, like the way her father always parked his car facing the street,
or how he had insisted on installing a security system that seemed excessive for their quiet neighborhood, or how he never left personal documents lying around the way other parents did. The implications of her discovery extended far beyond her immediate family. Emma realized that her mother might not know the truth either, or might know only part of it. The thought that their parents' entire marriage might be built on deception was almost too painful to consider. She found herself wondering if anything about their family life was genuine, or if it was all an elaborate cover story designed to protect her father's true identity. But even as doubt consumed her, Emma couldn't deny the love she felt from her father, the genuine care and protection he had always provided. Whatever his real name, whatever his past, he had been a devoted parent who had never made her feel unsafe or unloved. The man who had taught her about honesty and integrity might have been living a lie, but his love for her had always felt completely authentic. As evening approached and she heard her father's car in the driveway, Emma felt her heart racing. She had to make a choice about how to handle this knowledge, and she had to make it quickly. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the house like a countdown timer, marking the end of her old life and the beginning of something new and uncertain. Standing at the top of the stairs, badge hidden back in its secret place, Emma watched her father enter their home, briefcase in hand, calling out his usual greeting. He looked exactly the same as he had that morning, but everything about him was different now. He was no longer just her father, David Rodriguez, insurance adjuster and weekend coach. He was Marcus Thompson, federal agent, a man who had lived multiple identities and carried secrets that could potentially put their entire family at risk. The weight of her discovery pressed down on Emma like a physical force.
Realized that her childhood, in all its innocent simplicity, was over. The questions she now carried would change everything, regardless of how she chose to handle them. There was no going back to not knowing, no way to unsee what she had seen or unknow what she now understood about the elaborate fiction that had been her family's life. As her father looked up and smiled at her, asking about her day with the same gentle interest he had always shown, Emma felt the full magnitude of the moment. She was standing at the crossroads between the comfortable lies of her childhood and the complex truths of adult reality. The FBI badge had been more than just a hidden object. It had been a key that unlocked questions about identity, truth, and love that would reshape her understanding of everything she had believed about her family and herself. The evening routine proceeded normally, with dinner conversation about school, homework, and weekend plans. But Emma felt like she was watching it all from outside, observing a performance that she now knew was just that, a performance. Her father's easy smile and casual questions took on a different quality when viewed through the lens of her new knowledge. Every word felt calculated. Every gesture seemed practiced. Every expression of love was filtered through the understanding that nothing about their life together was exactly what it appeared to be. But perhaps most unsettling of all was the realization that despite everything she had discovered, despite the magnitude of the deception and the questions it raised about her entire life, she still loved her father completely. The bond between them hadn't been broken by the truth about his identity. If anything, it had become more complex and more precious. She was beginning to understand that love could coexist with deception, that protection could sometimes require lies, and that the simple categories of right and wrong she had always relied on might not be adequate for the complicated realities of adult life. As she went to bed that night, Emma knew that tomorrow would bring decisions she wasn't ready to make and conversations she wasn't prepared to have. The FBI badge would still be waiting in the attic, a tangible reminder of all the secrets her family carried, and whether she chose to confront the truth or continue living with the mystery, her life had already been forever changed by what she had discovered in that dusty corner of their perfectly ordinary home.
Listening to the sounds of the house, wondering if the creaks and settling noises that had always been comforting now represented potential threats her father was unconsciously monitoring even in his sleep.
she began to understand that the hypervigilance she had always attributed to his protective nature might actually be the ingrained survival instincts of someone who had lived in constant danger. During her lunch break at school, Emma started researching federal witness protection programs and agent extraction protocols. She discovered that deep cover agents often struggled with identity issues after lengthy undercover assignments, that marriages frequently failed due to the psychological toll of maintaining false identities, and that some agents found it impossible to ever fully transition back to normal civilian life. The academic article she found painted a picture of a profession that demanded everything from its practitioners while offering little in return except the abstract satisfaction of serving justice. The weight of carrying her father's secret began to affect Emma's daily life in ways she hadn't anticipated. She found herself distracted during classes, unable to concentrate on algebra equations when her mind was consumed with questions about her father's real name and the cases he had worked on. Her grades began to slip, and her best friend Madison noticed that Emma seemed withdrawn and preoccupied. When Madison pressed her about what was wrong, Emma felt the almost overwhelming urge to confide in someone about what she had discovered. The secret felt too large for one person to carry, too complex for her 16-year-old mind to process alone. But she also understood instinctively that sharing her father's secret could have consequences she couldn't predict or control. If David Rodriguez was indeed Marcus Thompson, former FBI agent, then there might be very good reasons why his true identity needed to remain hidden. Emma's relationship with her mother became strained as she struggled with the question of what Sarah actually knew about her husband's past. During dinner conversations, Emma found herself studying her mother's reactions to her father's stories, looking for signs that Sarah was either complicit in the deception or as much of a victim as Emma herself. The uncertainty was maddening, creating a sense of isolation within her own family that she had never experienced before. One evening, while her parents were watching television in the living room, Emma decided to test her theory in a small way. She casually mentioned a news story about insurance fraud in Los Angeles, a topic that should have been relevant to her father's professional interests. Instead of engaging with the subject, David became noticeably uncomfortable, deflecting the conversation toward Emma's upcoming chemistry test with a skill that seemed practiced rather than natural. The deflection confirmed Emma's growing suspicion that her father's discomfort with certain topics wasn't random, but followed a pattern related to his hidden past. Los Angeles had been mentioned in several of the FBI case files she had researched, and she began to wonder if Marcus Thompson had operated there during his undercover years. The possibility that her father had lived multiple lives in multiple cities while maintaining multiple identities was both fascinating and terrifying. Emma's search through the house became more systematic and careful. While her parents were at work and she was home alone after school, she explored areas she had never thought to examine before. She discovered that her father's home office, which she had always assumed was simply locked for privacy, actually contained more security measures than seemed necessary for an insurance adjuster. The filing cabinets were not just locked, but appeared to have additional security features that would prevent tampering. In the master bedroom closet, Emma found a small safe hidden behind her father's winter coats. She hadn't been looking for it specifically, but her new awareness of potential hiding places made her notice the
inconsistency in the closet's depth compared to the adjacent walls. The safe was securely locked, but its very existence raised new questions about what other secrets her father might be keeping beyond his FBI credentials. Emma's exploration led her to examine her father's behavior patterns with the analytical skills she was developing in her advanced placement psychology class. She began to recognize signs of what her textbook called hypervigilance, a condition common among people who had experienced chronic stress or trauma. Her father's habit of always sitting with his back to the wall in restaurants wasn't just a preference. It was a defensive positioning that allowed him to monitor potential threats while protecting his vulnerable angles. The realization that her father might be dealing with psychological trauma from his undercover years added a new dimension to Emma's understanding of the situation.
The man she had always seen as strong and unflappable might actually be carrying invisible wounds from experiences she couldn't imagine. The thought that he had endured danger and violence to protect society, only to be forced to carry those burdens in silence, filled Emma with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. As weeks passed, Emma noticed that her father seemed to sense her increased attention, though he couldn't possibly know the reason for it. David began asking more questions about her school day, her friends, and her activities with what seemed like genuine interest, but felt like gentle interrogation. His protective instincts, already strong, seemed to intensify, as if he sensed some undefined threat to his family's security. The irony wasn't lost on Emma that she was now engaged in the same kind of deceptive behavior that had apparently characterized her father's entire adult life. She was maintaining a false front, pretending that nothing had changed, while secretly gathering information and analyzing every interaction for hidden meanings. The parallels between her current behavior and what she imagined her father's undercover work had been like were both enlightening and disturbing. Emma's research into federal law enforcement led her to understand the concept of need-to-know basis for classified information. She began to wonder if her father's deception had been motivated not by a desire to lie to her family, but by a genuine need to protect them from information that could put them in danger. The possibility that there were people from his past who might still pose a threat to their family made her appreciate the elaborate steps he had taken to create and maintain their safe, ordinary life. The emotional complexity of the situation became more overwhelming as Emma realized that her anger about being deceived was competing with her growing admiration for the sacrifices her father had made. The David Rodriguez she had known her entire life might have been a carefully constructed identity, but the love and protection he had provided were absolutely genuine. The man who helped her with homework and coached her softball team had risked his life to infiltrate criminal organizations, and he had given up that career to focus on being her father. Emma's attempts to find more information about Marcus Thompson hit dead ends that seemed too convenient to be coincidental. Public records were sparse, online searches yielded minimal results, and even social media platforms showed no trace of anyone by that name with connections to federal law enforcement. The thoroughness of the information scrubbing suggested that her father's extraction from his former undercover career had been handled by professionals who understood how to erase digital footprints completely. The realization that her father's disappearance from his former life had been so complete made Emma understand the magnitude of what he had given up to become David Rodriguez. Marcus Thompson hadn't just changed careers, he had ceased to exist in any official capacity. All of his professional relationships, his achievements, his identity as a federal agent had been sacrificed to create the safe suburban life Emma had taken for granted. During a family dinner at a local restaurant, Emma experienced a moment of clarity that changed her perspective on the entire situation. As they waited for their food, she watched her father unconsciously monitor the other diners, noting the locations of exits and potential threats with the casual efficiency of someone for whom such awareness had become second nature. But when Emma made a joke about her chemistry teacher's bizarre fashion choices, his attention immediately focused on her with the warm, complete attention she had known her entire life. The duality of her father's nature became clear in that moment. He was simultaneously Marcus Thompson, trained federal agent with instincts honed by years of dangerous work, and David Rodriguez, devoted father whose greatest joy came from his daughter's happiness. The two identities weren't separate people. They were different aspects of the same man, and both were authentic expressions of who he truly was. Emma's understanding of the situation evolved from feeling betrayed by his deception to appreciating the complexity of his choices. Her father hadn't been living a lie so much as he had been protecting a truth that was too dangerous to share. The elaborate fiction of David Rodriguez had been created not to deceive his family, but to give them the normal life that his work as Marcus Thompson had made impossible. The shift in Emma's perspective brought new challenges as she struggled with the question of whether to confront her father about her discovery. The knowledge that she possessed information about his past felt like a burden that was affecting her ability to maintain their normal relationship. Every conversation felt loaded with subtext. Every casual interaction was colored by her awareness of the secrets he was keeping. Emma began to understand that her father's training in deception and misdirection made it virtually impossible for her to hide her own knowledge from him indefinitely. If Marcus Thompson had been skilled enough to maintain multiple false identities while infiltrating criminal organizations, then David Rodriguez would certainly be capable of detecting the behavioral changes in his own daughter. The question wasn't whether he would eventually realize that she knew his secret, but when and how that revelation would occur. The anticipation of that inevitable confrontation created a tension in Emma that affected every aspect of her daily life. She found herself rehearsing potential conversations, trying to imagine how she would respond when her father finally asked her directly about what she had discovered. The weight of carrying his secret alone was becoming unbearable, but she also feared that revealing her knowledge would fundamentally change their relationship in ways that couldn't be undone. Emma's research into the psychological effects of long-term undercover work helped her understand that her father's transition to civilian life might still be ongoing even after 10 years. The articles she read described former undercover agents who struggled with trust issues, identity confusion, and difficulty forming authentic relationships long after their assignments ended. The possibility that her father was still healing from psychological trauma made her more sympathetic to his need for privacy and control. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Emma, that her discovery of her father's secret had created many of the same psychological pressures she was reading about in her research. She was now maintaining a false identity herself, pretending to be the innocent daughter who knew nothing about her father's past, while actually carrying knowledge that could potentially destroy their family's carefully constructed life. The stress of the deception was giving her insight into what her father might have endured during his undercover years. As the weeks passed, Emma noticed subtle changes in the family dynamic that seemed to reflect the strain of secrets being kept by multiple people. Her mother appeared more anxious, though she claimed it was just work-related stress. Her father became more protective, instituting new rules about Emma's activities and whereabouts that seemed excessive but were presented as reasonable parental concerns. The house itself felt different, as if the weight of unspoken truths was affecting the very atmosphere of their home. Emma's growing maturity and understanding of adult complexities made her appreciate the sacrifices both of her parents had made to provide her with a stable childhood. Sarah had accepted a husband with a mysterious past and built a marriage on partial truths, while David had given up his career and identity to focus on being a father. The love that had created and sustained their family was real, even if some of the details surrounding it were fabricated. The most difficult aspect of carrying her father's secret was the isolation it created within her own family. Emma felt like she was living in two different realities simultaneously: the comfortable fiction of their normal suburban life and the complex truth of her father's hidden past. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting, and she found herself longing for the simple certainties of her childhood when her biggest worry was whether she would make the honor roll. Emma's newfound awareness of deception and hidden truths began to affect her perception of other people in relationships. She found herself analyzing her teachers, her friends, and even casual acquaintances with the same suspicious eye she had turned on her father. The discovery that someone she trusted completely had been living a fundamental lie made her question whether anyone was exactly who they appeared to be. The weight of her knowledge created a sense of premature adulthood that Emma wasn't sure she was ready for. At 16, she was being forced to grapple with questions about loyalty, truth and family bonds that most people didn't face until much later in life. The FBI badge in the attic had opened a door to adult complexities that she couldn't close, and she was struggling to find her footing in this new reality. As Emma lay in bed at night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar sounds of her house, she realized that her discovery had changed more than just her understanding of her father's past. It had changed her understanding of truth itself, revealing it to be more nuanced and contextual than she had ever imagined. The simple categories of honesty and deception that had governed her moral framework as a child were proving inadequate for the complex realities she was now facing. The knowledge that her father was someone other than David Rodriguez had become a lens through which Emma viewed every aspect of their family life. Family photographs took on new meaning as she wondered about the stories behind them, whether the happy moments they captured were genuine or carefully staged performances. Holiday traditions and family rituals were now suspect, potentially fabricated elements of an elaborate cover story rather than authentic expressions of their family's identity. Emma's relationship with her own identity became complicated as she realized that if her father wasn't who she thought he was, then she wasn't who she thought she was either. The family history she had always carried as part of her sense of self might be partially or completely false. The stories her father had told her about her heritage, her grandparents, and her family's background were all now questionable, leaving her feeling unmoored from her own past.
Who had always known her as a focused, high-achieving student, began expressing concern about her apparent lack of engagement with her coursework. The irony that her father had always emphasized the importance of education and academic excellence made her declining grades feel like another layer of deception in their relationship. The approaching holiday season created additional stress for Emma as she contemplated maintaining the pretense of normalcy through family celebrations that now felt like elaborate performances. The thought of sitting through Thanksgiving dinner, listening to her father tell stories she now knew might be fabricated, while pretending she still believed in the fiction of their family history, seemed almost unbearable. Emma's research into her father's potential past had reached the limits of what she could discover through public sources and online investigation. The classified nature of undercover operations meant that most specific details about cases and operations were permanently sealed from public access. Her growing understanding of federal law enforcement procedures made her realize that even if she could somehow access official records, doing so would likely trigger security protocols that could expose her father's current identity to people who might wish him harm. The realization that her amateur investigation had gone as far as it could go forced Emma to confront the central question she had been avoiding: whether to directly ask her father about what she had discovered. The conversation would inevitably change everything between them, but the alternative of continuing to carry the secret alone was becoming impossible to sustain. The weight of her knowledge was affecting every aspect of her life, and she was beginning to understand that some secrets were too significant to bear in isolation. As Emma prepared for what she knew would eventually be the most important conversation of her life, she found herself appreciating her father's love and protection in new ways. The man who had created David Rodriguez might have been motivated by the need to escape his past, but he had also been motivated by the desire to give his daughter the safe, normal childhood that his work as Marcus Thompson had made impossible. The elaborate deception hadn't been about him. It had been about protecting her from a world of danger and complexity that no child should have to navigate. The FBI badge hidden in the attic represented more than just her father's secret identity. It represented a lifetime of service and sacrifice that had culminated in his decision to give up everything to focus on being her father. Emma was beginning to understand that the greatest act of love her father had ever performed wasn't anything he had done as David Rodriguez, but rather everything he had given up as Marcus Thompson to make David Rodriguez possible. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon when Emma arrived home from school to find her father waiting for her in the living room, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it.
Her heart immediately began racing as she wondered if he had somehow discovered her knowledge about his true identity. The FBI badge was still hidden in the attic, but Emma had become increasingly worried that her behavioral changes had given away her secret. David gestured for Emma to sit down across from him, his posture formal in a way that reminded her uncomfortably of the federal agent she now knew him to be. His hands were folded carefully in his lap, and she noticed that he had positioned himself where he could see all the entrances to the room, a habit she now recognized as tactical positioning rather than casual preference. For several long moments, neither of them spoke. Emma felt the weight of weeks of deception pressing down on her as she waited for her father to reveal whatever had prompted this unusual conversation. She had rehearsed various scenarios in her mind, but none of them had prepared her for the calm intensity of his current demeanor. David finally broke the silence with a question that caught Emma completely off guard.
Asked if she had noticed anything unusual about the house recently, anything out of place or different from how she remembered it. The question seemed innocuous, but something in his tone suggested that her answer would be more significant than it appeared. Emma's mind raced as she tried to determine whether this was a test related to her discovery of the badge or if there was some other concern prompting his inquiry. She decided to answer honestly, admitting that she had been paying more attention to details lately and had noticed some things that seemed inconsistent with the stories she had always heard about their family history. Her father's reaction to her careful admission was immediate and telling. His shoulders tensed slightly, and she saw a flash of something that looked like relief mixed with resignation cross his features. Emma realized that he had been expecting this conversation, that her behavioral changes over the past several weeks had been more transparent to him than she had hoped. David stood up and walked to the window, looking out at their quiet suburban street with the practiced surveillance habits Emma now recognized. When he turned back to face her, his expression had shifted from wariness to something that looked almost like gratitude. He asked her directly if there was something specific she wanted to discuss with him, giving her an opening to reveal what she had discovered. Emma felt her carefully planned speeches dissolving under the intensity of the moment. Instead of the measured revelation she had rehearsed, she found herself simply asking if David Rodriguez was his real name. The question hung in the air between them like a challenge, and Emma watched as her father's face cycled through several emotions before settling on what looked like profound sadness. The admission, when it finally came, was both anticlimactic and earth-shattering. David confirmed that David Rodriguez was not the name he had been born with, and that his past was more complicated than he had ever allowed her to know. He explained that there were aspects of his previous life that he had kept secret, not to deceive her but to protect her from information that could potentially put their entire family in danger. Emma felt a mixture of vindication and terror as her father began to share pieces of the truth she had been seeking for weeks. He confirmed that he had worked in federal law enforcement, though he was careful not to provide specific details about the assignments or the cases he had worked on. The vague confirmation of her suspicions felt both satisfying and inadequate, leaving her with more questions than answers. David explained that his decision to leave his previous career and create a new identity had been motivated by his desire to provide Emma with a normal childhood, free from the dangers and complications that had defined his life as a federal agent. The sacrifice he had made hadn't just been professional, it had been personal, requiring him to abandon relationships, achievements, and aspects of his identity that had taken years to develop. The conversation that Emma had been anticipating for weeks turned out to be more emotional and less dramatic than she had expected. Rather than angry confrontations or shocking revelations, it became a careful negotiation between a father trying to protect his daughter and a daughter trying to understand her place in a family built on necessary deceptions. Emma asked about her mother's knowledge of the situation, and David's hesitation before answering told her everything she needed to know. Sarah knew some of the truth, but not all of it, creating a complex web of partial disclosures and protective lies that had apparently sustained their marriage for over a decade. The realization that her mother was also living with unanswered questions about her husband's past made Emma feel less alone in her confusion. As the initial shock of the conversation began to fade, Emma found herself asking more specific questions about her father's past and the reasons for his continued secrecy.
David's answers were carefully measured, providing enough information to satisfy her immediate curiosity while withholding details that he clearly felt were too dangerous to share. The balancing act he was performing between honesty and protection frustrated Emma, but she was beginning to understand the impossible position he found himself in. The discussion of practical implications proved to be the most unsettling aspect of their conversation. David explained that certain precautions they had always taken, certain rules about sharing personal information and being aware of their surroundings, were not just general safety measures, but specific protocols designed to protect them from potential threats related to his former work. The realization that she had been living under a security umbrella her entire life without knowing it was both comforting and terrifying. Emma's questions about whether they were currently in danger received answers that were more reassuring than she had expected. David explained that the passage of time and the thorough nature of his extraction from federal service had significantly reduced any potential risks, but that maintaining certain security practices had become second nature for him. The hypervigilance she had noticed wasn't paranoia. It was professional habit maintained out of an abundance of caution. The conversation about Emma's discovery of the FBI badge was perhaps the most difficult part of their discussion. David's expression when she described finding it hidden in the attic showed a mixture of disappointment in his own security lapses and admiration for her detective work. He admitted that he had kept certain mementos from his previous career, not out of nostalgia, but as reminders of the life he had chosen to leave behind. David's explanation of why he had preserved evidence of his former identity was more complex than Emma had anticipated. The documents weren't just sentimental keepsakes. They were insurance policies that could potentially be necessary if threats from his past ever materialized. The badge and identification represented access to resources and protection that might become crucial if their carefully constructed civilian life was ever compromised. Emma's understanding of her father's situation evolved throughout their conversation as she began to grasp the ongoing nature of his sacrifice. Creating David Rodriguez hadn't been a one-time decision. It was a daily choice to maintain an identity that felt increasingly natural but could never be completely authentic. Every story he told about his childhood, every explanation he gave for his preferences or knowledge, every interaction with neighbors and colleagues required him to maintain a level of deception that Emma was only beginning to appreciate. The question of what Emma would do with the information she now possessed became the central focus of their discussion. David made it clear that her knowledge of his true background created potential security risks that went beyond their immediate family. The number of people who knew about Marcus Thompson's transformation into David Rodriguez was deliberately kept small, and Emma's awareness of the secret made her a potential vulnerability if the wrong people ever tried to locate him. Emma's assurance that she would never reveal her father's secret felt inadequate, given the gravity of what he was sharing with her. David explained that the burden of carrying classified information wasn't just about keeping secrets, it was about understanding that certain knowledge could put people's lives at risk if it fell into the wrong hands. The weight of that responsibility was something Emma had never considered when she first discovered the badge. The discussion of how their relationship would change moving forward proved to be the most emotionally charged aspect of their conversation. David's admission that he could never share certain details about his past, even with Emma, meant that their relationship would always contain elements of mystery and incomplete disclosure. Emma struggled with the idea that there would always be parts of her father's life
that she couldn't access or understand. Emma's request to know her father's real name led to one of the most poignant moments in their conversation. David's reluctance to share that information wasn't about distrust, but about the symbolic significance of names and identity. Marcus Thompson represented a person who had ceased to exist in
any official capacity, and speaking that name aloud felt like summoning a ghost from a past that was supposed to be buried. When David finally told Emma that his birth name was Marcus Thompson, the moment felt both momentous and ordinary. The name didn't carry any special power or significance beyond confirming what Emma had already suspected, but hearing it spoken by her father made his former identity feel real in a way that seeing it on an ID card hadn't accomplished. The practical aspects of moving forward with their new level of honesty required careful consideration of what could and couldn't be shared with Sarah. David explained that his wife's partial knowledge of his background was a deliberate choice, designed to protect her from information that could make her a target if the wrong people ever came looking for Marcus Thompson. The complexity of maintaining different levels of disclosure within the same family was something Emma hadn't anticipated. Emma's role in maintaining the family's security became a topic that required delicate negotiation. David needed her to understand the importance of operational security without overwhelming her with fears about threats that might never materialize. The balance between appropriate caution and normal teenage life proved to be as challenging for him to navigate as a parent as it had been for him to manage as a federal agent. The conversation about Emma's future and how her father's past might affect her college applications and career choices revealed another layer of complexity in their situation. David's lack of verifiable personal history meant that certain opportunities requiring extensive background checks might be complicated for Emma, though he assured her that arrangements could be made through his former contacts if necessary. Emma's questions about whether other family members knew the truth led to revelations about the extended network of people who had been involved in David's transition from federal agent to suburban father. The process of creating a new identity required cooperation from multiple agencies and individuals, creating a web of people who knew various pieces of the truth, but not the complete picture. The discussion of what would happen if David's former identity was ever discovered by hostile parties was perhaps the most sobering aspect of their conversation. David explained that contingency plans existed for such scenarios, but that implementing them would require the family to abandon their current life and potentially relocate under new identities. The possibility that their comfortable existence could disappear overnight was something Emma had never considered. As their conversation began to wind down, Emma found herself grappling with a new understanding of courage and sacrifice. Her father's decision to give up his career and identity to focus on being her father represented a level of dedication that she was only beginning to appreciate. The elaborate deception that had initially felt like betrayal now seemed like the ultimate expression of parental love. The agreement they reached about moving forward was necessarily vague and flexible. Emma would continue to live her normal life while being more aware of security considerations that had always been present but unacknowledged. David would share what information he could about his past while maintaining the boundaries necessary to protect their family's safety. Emma's promise to never reveal what she had learned extended beyond simple secrecy to include a commitment to helping maintain the fiction of David Rodriguez when necessary. The realization that she was now an active participant in her father's cover identity rather than an unwitting beneficiary of it
marked a significant shift in her role within the family. The emotional aftermath of their conversation left both Emma and David feeling drained but relieved. The weeks of tension and uncertainty had been resolved, replaced by a new kind of complexity that felt more manageable because it was based on honesty rather than deception. Emma's relationship with her father hadn't returned to its previous simplicity, but it had evolved into something deeper and more nuanced. In the days following their conversation, Emma noticed subtle changes in the family dynamic that reflected their new level of understanding. David seemed more relaxed, as if the burden of maintaining complete secrecy from his daughter had been more stressful than he had allowed himself to acknowledge. Emma found herself appreciating aspects of their family life that she had previously taken for granted, understanding now the deliberate choices and sacrifices that had made their normal existence possible. Sarah's awareness that something had shifted between Emma and David was evident, though she didn't press for details about what they had discussed.
The careful boundaries that existed within their family became more apparent to Emma as she watched her mother navigate the complex dynamics of a household where different people knew different aspects of the truth. Emma's perspective on truth and deception had been fundamentally altered by learning about her father's past and the reasons for his continued secrecy. The simple moral categories she had relied on as a child proved inadequate for the complex realities of adult life, where protection sometimes required lies and love sometimes demanded sacrifice of personal authenticity. The integration of her new knowledge into daily life proved to be less dramatic than Emma had anticipated. Rather than feeling like she was living with a stranger, she began to see her father as a more complete person whose various identities and experiences had combined to create the loving parent she had always known. Marcus Thompson and David Rodriguez weren't separate people, they were different aspects of the same man who had chosen to prioritize his family above all else. Emma's academic performance began to improve as the stress of carrying her father's secret alone was replaced by the security of shared knowledge. Her teachers noticed that her focus and engagement had returned, though they attributed the change to typical teenage fluctuations in motivation rather than the resolution of a complex family crisis. The approaching college application season took on new significance as Emma considered how her father's background might influence her choices and opportunities. Rather than feeling limited by his past, she began to see it as evidence of the possibilities that existed in life, proof that people could reinvent themselves, and that courage came in many different forms. Emma's relationship with her friends evolved as she gained a new appreciation for the complexity of family relationships and the sacrifices parents made for their children. While she couldn't share the specific details of what she had learned about her father, the experience of discovering hidden depths in someone she thought she knew completely made her more understanding of others' private struggles and secrets. The holiday season that Emma had been dreading became a celebration of her family's resilience and love rather than a performance of fictional relationships. Understanding the sacrifices her father had made to create their traditions and the genuine affection behind their family rituals made even ordinary moments feel precious and meaningful. As Emma prepared for her senior year of high school and the transition to college, she carried with her a more sophisticated understanding of identity, sacrifice, and love than most of her peers possessed. The discovery of her father's FBI badge had opened a door to adult complexities that she was still processing, but it had also revealed the extraordinary lengths to which parents would go to protect and provide for their children. The badge itself, still
In the attic where Emma had found it, had become a symbol not of deception, but of service and sacrifice. It represented Marcus Thompson's years of dangerous work in service of justice. But more importantly, it represented his decision to give up that identity to become the father Emma needed him to be. The weight of that sacrifice would stay with Emma as she moved forward in life, shaping her understanding of love, duty, and the complex choices that define adulthood. Emma's story had evolved from a simple tale of discovering her father's secret to a more complex narrative about the nature of identity, the price of protection, and the different forms that love could take. The 16-year-old who had climbed into the attic looking for Christmas decorations had been transformed by her discovery into someone who understood that truth was more nuanced than she had ever imagined, and that sometimes the greatest acts of love required the greatest personal sacrifices. The future stretched ahead of Emma with new possibilities and challenges, but she faced it with the confidence that came from understanding her father's courage and the security that came from knowing the lengths to which he would go to protect his family. The FBI badge had revealed more than just a hidden identity. It had revealed the depth of parental love and the complex moral landscape of adult life that Emma was now beginning to navigate with greater wisdom and appreciation. As Emma looked toward her 18th birthday and the independence that would come with college, she carried with her the knowledge that identity was something that could be chosen and changed, that courage came in many forms, and that the most important truths weren't always the ones that could be spoken aloud. The secret she now shared with her father had become a bond that strengthened rather than complicated their relationship.
proof that love could survive even the most challenging revelations, and that families could be built on foundations more solid than simple honesty. The months following Emma's conversation with her father brought unexpected changes to their family dynamic that neither of them had anticipated. Rather than creating distance or suspicion, the shared secret seemed to strengthen the bond between them in ways that surprised both Emma and David. The teenager who had once felt deceived by her father's hidden identity now found herself serving as his closest confidant within the family, a role that brought both privilege and responsibility. Emma's newfound awareness of her father's past began to influence her perspective on current events and social issues in ways she hadn't expected. When news reports discussed organized crime investigations or federal law enforcement operations, she found herself viewing them through the lens of someone who understood the personal cost of such work. The abstract concept of justice that she had learned about in civics class became concrete and personal as she considered the sacrifices her father had made in service of protecting society. The psychological adjustment to her new reality proved more complex than Emma had initially anticipated. While she had gained answers to questions that had puzzled her for weeks, those answers had generated new uncertainties about identity, truth, and family relationships. The simple worldview of her childhood, where people were exactly who they appeared to be, and families shared complete honesty, had been replaced by a more nuanced understanding of the compromises adults made to protect the people they loved. David's behavior toward Emma evolved subtly in the wake of their conversation, reflecting his relief at no longer having to maintain complete secrecy from his daughter. He began sharing carefully selected stories from his past, always avoiding specific details that could compromise security, but offering glimpses into the experiences that had shaped him into the man who became her father. These stories, told during their evening walks or quiet moments when Sarah was occupied elsewhere, became
precious opportunities for Emma to understand the complexity of her father's journey. The challenge of maintaining different levels of disclosure within the same household required Emma to develop skills she had never needed before. When family friends or relatives asked about David's background or childhood, Emma found herself helping to maintain the fiction of David Rodriguez's history with the same careful attention to detail that her father had always employed. The collaborative nature of protecting their family secret created a new kind of intimacy between father and daughter that was both meaningful and burdensome. Emma's relationship with her mother became more complicated as she struggled with the knowledge that Sarah lived with only partial understanding of her husband's true background. The teenager found herself caught between her father's need for operational security and her mother's right to know the truth about the man she had married. The ethical complexity of the situation was something Emma had never encountered before, and it forced her to grapple with questions about loyalty, honesty, and the different obligations family members had to each other. The practical implications of her father's past began to surface in unexpected ways as Emma navigated her senior year of high school. College counselors asking about family background for scholarship applications required careful responses that were truthful without being revealing. The security clearance requirements for certain summer internship programs posed potential complications that Emma and David had to discuss and plan around. These challenges highlighted the ongoing impact of David's decision to assume a false identity, effects that extended beyond his own life to influence his daughter's opportunities and choices. Emma's social relationships with peers became more challenging as she found herself unable to share the most significant discovery of her adolescence with her closest friends. The weight of carrying such a profound secret created a sense of isolation that was particularly difficult for a teenager accustomed to sharing everything with her social circle. The irony that her father's work had been dedicated to protecting society, while her knowledge of that work now separated her from her own community, was not lost on Emma. The development of Emma's own moral framework was significantly influenced by her father's example of choosing family over career advancement and personal recognition.
The realization that Marcus Thompson had given up professional achievements and public acknowledgement of his service to focus on being David Rodriguez' devoted father provided Emma with a powerful example of sacrifice and prioritization that shaped her own understanding of what mattered most in life. David's gradual sharing of selected experiences from his undercover years gave Emma insight into the psychological challenges faced by people whose work required them to maintain false identities for extended periods. She learned about the difficulty of remembering which background story belonged to which identity, the stress of maintaining character even in moments of extreme danger, and the loneliness of being unable to form genuine relationships while undercover. These revelations helped Emma understand why her father valued their authentic family relationships so deeply, and why he had been willing to sacrifice everything else to protect them. The question of whether Emma's younger cousins or future siblings would ever learn the truth about David's background became a topic of ongoing discussion between father and daughter. Emma's unique position as the only family member who knew the complete story created both privileges and burdens that would only grow more complex as their family potentially expanded. The responsibility of deciding when and how to share such information with other family members was something David had hoped never to face, but Emma's discovery had made such decisions inevitable. Emma's academic interests began to shift toward
Subjects that would help her understand her father's world and experiences. She enrolled in psychology courses to better comprehend the effects of long-term deception and identity displacement. Her history classes took on new significance as she studied the evolution of organized crime and federal law enforcement responses. Even her literature courses became more meaningful as she explored themes of identity, sacrifice, and the costs of protecting others. The financial aspects of David's transition from federal agent to suburban father became clearer to Emma as she matured and began to understand household economics. The comfortable middle-class life they enjoyed was possible not just because of David's insurance job, but because of careful financial planning and support systems that had been established during his extraction from federal service. The realization that their family's security was built on more than just her father's current employment made Emma appreciate the complexity of the transition he had navigated. Emma's perception of their neighborhood and community changed as she began to understand the security considerations that had influenced her father's choice of where to live. The quiet suburban streets that had always felt safe and boring now revealed themselves as the result of careful analysis of crime statistics, proximity to law enforcement resources, and demographic factors that reduced the likelihood of encountering people from David's past. Every aspect of their seemingly ordinary life had been deliberately chosen to maximize their family's safety and security. The impact of carrying her father's secret began to influence Emma's own relationship with truth and deception in ways she was still discovering. She found herself becoming more observant of inconsistencies in other people's stories, more aware of the gaps and contradictions that everyone carried in their personal narratives. The realization that everyone maintained certain levels of privacy and selective disclosure made her more understanding of human complexity, while also making her more skeptical of simple explanations. Emma's preparation for college took on additional layers of consideration as she and David discussed the potential implications of his background for her future career choices. Certain fields that required extensive background checks or security clearances might be complicated by her father's history, though David assured her that arrangements could be made if necessary. The conversation highlighted how the choices parents made could continue to influence their children's lives in unexpected ways, even decades later. The holiday season brought new meaning to family traditions as Emma understood the deliberate effort her father had put into creating meaningful rituals and celebrations for their family. The Christmas decorations she had been searching for when she discovered the FBI badge now seemed symbolic of David's commitment to providing normal, joyful experiences for his daughter. Every family tradition, from birthday celebrations to vacation destinations, had been chosen with careful consideration of both security and the desire to create lasting positive memories.
Emma's understanding of courage evolved as she learned more about her father's experiences and the daily acts of bravery required by his former profession. The traditional heroic narratives she had grown up with were replaced by a more complex appreciation for the different kinds of courage could take. Her father's willingness to walk away from recognition and professional advancement to focus on being a present parent represented a kind of bravery that was less dramatic, but perhaps more challenging than the physical courage required by his undercover work. The question of how much detail Emma really wanted to know about her father's past became more complex as David became more willing to share selected stories. Some experiences were clearly too traumatic or dangerous for him to discuss, while others carried implications about the criminal justice system and federal law enforcement that were
Difficult for a teenager to process. Emma found herself having to set her own boundaries about what information she was ready to handle and what could wait until she was older and more mature. Emma's relationship with authority figures at school and in the community changed subtly as she gained insight into the complexity of law enforcement work and the personal costs borne by people who chose such careers. Her respect for her teachers, local police officers, and other public servants deepened as she understood the sacrifices they and their families made in service of their communities. The abstract concept of public service became personal and meaningful in ways that influenced her own thinking about future career choices. The development of Emma's own identity became more intentional as she grappled with questions about authenticity, privacy, and the different aspects of personality that people chose to reveal in different contexts. Her father's example of successfully maintaining multiple identities while preserving his core values provided a framework for thinking about the difference between deception and selective disclosure. Emma began to understand that everyone presented different versions of themselves in different situations, and that this wasn't necessarily dishonest, but rather a natural adaptation to various social contexts. The impact of Emma's knowledge on her relationship with extended family members created ongoing challenges that required careful navigation. Grandparents who asked about family history, aunts and uncles who wanted to share childhood memories with David, and cousins who were curious about their family's background all posed potential security risks that Emma now understood and helped manage. The collaborative effort required to maintain their family's cover story strengthened the bond between Emma and David while creating stress around family gatherings and social events. Emma's future plans began to incorporate consideration of how her father's background might influence her own life choices and opportunities. The possibility of following in his footsteps by pursuing a career in federal law enforcement held both appeal and complications that she was still exploring. David's insights into the personal costs of such work provided Emma with realistic expectations about what such a career would require, while his example of successful transition to civilian life showed that change was possible when priorities shifted. The ongoing process of integrating her new knowledge into daily life required Emma to develop sophisticated judgment about when and how to use information about her father's past. Understanding the difference between details that were merely private and those that were genuinely dangerous became crucial for making appropriate decisions about what could be shared and with whom. The responsibility of carrying classified information, even secondhand, was something Emma took seriously as she matured. Emma's appreciation for her mother's strength and adaptability grew as she observed Sarah navigating marriage to a man whose past contained elements she might never fully understand. The grace with which her mother had accepted partial truths and built a loving family despite unanswered questions provided Emma with a model for handling uncertainty and focusing on what was most important in relationships. Sarah's example showed Emma that love could coexist with mystery, and that trust didn't always require complete disclosure. The question of whether Emma would ever meet other family members who knew her father as Marcus Thompson remained open and complex. David's former colleagues, supervisors, and contacts from his federal career represented connections to a world Emma was curious about but might never safely access. The possibility of someday meeting people who had worked with her father during his undercover years held both appeal and potential complications that would need careful consideration.
Emma's senior year of high school proceeded with a new sense of purpose and maturity
that her teachers and classmates noticed but couldn't fully explain. The teenager who had once been primarily concerned with grades, friendships, and college applications now carried herself with the confidence of someone who had faced adult complexities and emerged with a deeper understanding of life's challenges. Her academic performance improved as she gained focus and direction from understanding the sacrifices her father had made to provide her with educational opportunities. The ongoing evolution of Emma's relationship with David continued to surprise both of them as they discovered new ways to connect while respecting the boundaries necessary for their family's security. Their shared secret had become a foundation for deeper communication and mutual respect, rather than a source of tension or mistrust. The father-daughter relationship that had always been strong became even more meaningful as it incorporated honest discussion of complex moral and ethical questions. Emma's perspective on privacy and personal disclosure was forever changed by her experience of discovering and learning to carry her father's secret. She developed a more sophisticated understanding of the different levels of truth that people maintained in various relationships and the legitimate reasons why complete honesty wasn't always appropriate or safe. This understanding made her more mature in her own relationships and more respectful of other people's boundaries and privacy needs. The approach of Emma's 18th birthday marked a significant milestone in her journey from the child who had grown up as David Rodriguez's daughter to the young adult who understood herself as Marcus Thompson's daughter as well. The integration of these two identities, her father's past and present, into her own sense of self represented a coming-of-age process that was more complex than typical teenage development, but had ultimately strengthened her understanding of identity, family, and love. As Emma prepared for college and the independence that would come with it, she carried with her lessons about sacrifice, courage, and the different forms that protection could take. Her father's example had taught her that sometimes the most heroic acts were quiet ones, that love often required giving up recognition and personal advancement, and that the most important victories were often private ones that would never be celebrated publicly. These lessons would guide Emma as she faced her own choices about how to use her talents and education in service of others. The FBI badge that had started Emma's journey of discovery remained hidden in the attic, but its significance had evolved from a symbol of deception to a representation of service and sacrifice. It reminded Emma daily of the complex moral landscape that adults navigated and the difficult choices her father had made to provide her with safety, stability, and love. The badge represented not just Marcus Thompson's past, but David Rodriguez's present commitment to being the father Emma deserved, whatever the personal cost to himself.
Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.